Chapter 9 continued. The pre-designed body. Like the geography of the planet, the human body has until now represented a fixed point in human experience, a given. Today we are fast approaching the day when the body can no longer be regarded as fixed. Man will be able, within a reasonably short period, to redesign not merely individual bodies, but the entire human race. In 1962, Doctors Watson and Crick received the Nobel Prize for describing the DNA molecule. Since then, advances in genetics have come tripping over one another at a rapid pace. Molecular biology is now about to explode from the laboratories. New genetic knowledge will permit us to tinker with human heredity and manipulate the genes to create altogether new versions of man. One of the more fantastic possibilities is that man will be able to make biological carbon copies of himself. Through a process known as cloning, it will be possible to grow from the nucleus of an adult cell a new organism that has the same genetic characteristics of the person contributing the cell nucleus. The resultant human copy would start life with a genetic endowment identical to that of the donor, although cultural differences might thereafter alter the personality or physical development of the clone. Cloning would make it possible for people to see themselves born anew, to fill the world with twins of themselves. Cloning would, among other things, provide us with solid empirical evidence to help us resolve, once and for all, the ancient controversy over nature versus nurture, or heredity versus environment. The solution of this problem, through the determination of the role played by each, would be one of the great milestones of human intellectual development. Whole libraries of philosophical speculation could, by a single stroke, be rendered irrelevant. An answer to this question would open the way for speedy, qualitative advances in psychology, moral philosophy, and a dozen other fields. But cloning could also create undreamed of complications for the race. There is a certain charm to the idea of Albert Einstein bequeathing copies of himself to posterity. But what of Adolf Hitler? Should there be laws to regulate cloning? Nobel laureate Joshua Lederberg, a scientific who takes his social responsibility very seriously, believes it conceivable that those most likely to replicate themselves will be those who are most narcissistic, and that the clones they produce will also be narcissists. Even if narcissism, however, is culturally rather than biologically transmitted, there are other eerie difficulties. Thus, Lederberg raises a question as to whether human cloning, if permitted, might not go critical. I use that phrase, he told me, in almost exactly the same sense that is involved in nuclear energy. It will go critical if there is a sufficient positive advantage to doing so. This has to do with whether the efficiency of communication, particularly along educational lines, is increased as between identical genotypes or not. The similarity of neurological hardware might make it easier for identical copies to transmit technical and other insights from one generation to the next. How close is cloning? It has already been done in amphibia, says Lederberg, and somebody may be doing it right now with mammals. This was written in 1970, remember. It wouldn't surprise me if it comes out any day now. When someone will have the courage to try it in a man, I haven't the foggiest idea, but I put the time scale on that anywhere from 0 to 15 years from now, within 15 years. During those same 15 years, scientists will also learn how the various organs of the body develop, and they will, no doubt, begin to experiment with various means of modifying them. Says Liederberg, things like the size of the brain and certain sensory qualities of the brain are going to be brought under direct developmental control. I think this is very near. It is important for laymen to understand that Liederberg is by no means a lone worrier in the scientific community. His fears about the biological revolution are shared by many of his colleagues. The ethical, moral, and political questions raised by the new biology simply boggle the mind. Who shall live and who shall die? What is man? Who shall control research? Who shall control research into these fields? How shall new findings be applied? Might we not unleash horrors for which man is totally unprepared? In the opinion of many of the world's leading scientists, the clock is ticking for a biological Hiroshima. Imagine, for example, the implications of biological breakthroughs in what might be termed birth technology. Dr. E.S.E. Havez, an internationally respected biologist at Washington State University, has publicly suggested, on the basis of his own astonishing work on reproduction, that within a mere 10 to 15 years a woman will be able to buy a tiny frozen embryo, take it to her doctor, have it implanted in her uterus, carry it for 9 months, and then give birth to it as though it had been conceived in her own body. The embryo would, in effect, be sold with a guarantee that the resultant baby would be free of genetic defect. The purchaser would also be told in advance the colour of the baby's eyes and hair, its sex, its probable size at maturity, and its probable IQ. Indeed, it will be possible at some point to do away with the female uterus altogether. Babies will be conceived, matured, and raised. Nurtured and raised to maturity outside the human body. It is clearly only a matter of years before the work begun by Dr. Daniele Petrucci in Bologna and other scientists in the US and the Soviet Union makes it possible for women to have babies without the discomfort of pregnancy. The potential applications of such discoveries raise memories of Brave New World and astounding science fiction. Thus, Dr. Havez, in a sweep of his imagination, suggests that fertilized human eggs might be useful in the colonization of the planets. Instead of shipping adults to Mars, we could ship a shoebox full of such cells and grow them into an entire city-sized population of humans. When you consider how much it costs in fuel to lift every pound off the launch pad, Dr. Havez observes, why send full-grown men and women aboard spaceships? Instead, why not ship tiny embryos in the care of a competent biologist? We miniaturize other spacecraft components. Why not the passengers? Long before such developments occur in outer space, however, the impact of the new birth technology will strike home on Earth, splintering our traditional notions of sexuality, motherhood, love, child rearing, and education. Discussions about the future of the family that deal only with the pill overlook the biological witch's brew now seething in the laboratories. The moral and emotional choices that will confront us in the coming decades are mind-staggering. A fierce controversy is already raging today among biologists over the problems and ethical issues arising out of eugenics. Should we try to breed a better race? If so, exactly what is better? And who is to decide? Such questions are not entirely new, yet the techniques soon to be available smash the traditional limits of the argument. We can now imagine remaking the human race not as a farmer slowly and laboriously breeds up his herd, but as an artist might, employing a brilliant range of unfamiliar colours, shapes, and forms. Not far from Route 80, outside the little town of Hazard, Kentucky, is a place picturesquely known as Valley of Troublesome Creek. In this tiny backwoods community lives a family whose members, for generations, have been marked by a strange anomaly: blue skin. According to Dr. Madison Cawein, Cawein, of the University of Kentucky College of Medicine, who tracked the family down and traced its story, the blue-skinned people seem perfectly normal in other respects. Their unusual colour is caused by a rare enzyme deficiency that has been passed from one generation to the next. Given our new, fast-accumulating knowledge of genetics, we shall be able to breed whole new races of blue people, or for that matter, green, purple, or orange. In a world still suffering from the moral lesion of racism, this is a thought to be conjured with. Should we strive for a world in which all people share the same skin colour? If we want that, we shall no doubt have the technical means for bringing it about. Or should we instead work toward even greater diversity than now exists? What happens to the entire concept of race, to standards of physical beauty, to notions of superiority or inferiority? We are hurtling towards the time when we will be able to breed both super and sub-races. As Theodore J. Gordon put it in The Future, given the ability to tailor the race, I wonder if we would create all men equal, or would we choose to manufacture apartheid? Might the races of the future be a superior group, the DNA controllers, the humble servants, special athletes of the games, research scientists with 200 IQ and diminutive bodies? We shall have the power to produce races of morons or of mathematical savants. We shall also be able to breed babies with supernormal vision or hearing, supernormal ability to detect changes in odour, or supernormal muscular or musical skills. We will be able to create sexual super athletes, girls with super mammaries, and perhaps more or less than the standard two, and countless other varieties of the previous monomorphic human being. Ultimately, the problems are not scientific or technical, but ethical and political. Choice, and the criteria for choice, will be critical. The eminent science fiction author William Tenn once mused about the possibilities of genetic manipulation and the difficulties of choice. Assuming hopefully for the moment that no dictator, self-righteous planning board, or omnipotent black box is going to make genetic selections for the coming generation, then who or what is? Not parents, certainly. He said, they'll take the problem to their friendly neighbourhood certified gene architect. It seems inevitable to me that there will be also competitive schools of genetic architecture. The functionalists will persuade parents to produce babies fitted for the present needs of society. The futurists will suggest children who will have a niche in the culture as it will have evolved in 20 years. The romantics will insist that each child be bred with at least one outstanding talent, and the naturalists will advise the production of individuals so balanced genetically as to be in almost perfect equilibrium. Human body styles, like human clothing styles, will become outre or à la mode, as the genetic couturiers who designed them come into and out of vogue. Buried behind this tongue-in-cheek are serious issues made more profound by the immensity of the possibilities, some of them so grotesque that they appear to leap at us from the canvases of Hieronymus Bosch. Mention was made earlier of the ideas of breeding men with gills or implanting gills in them for efficiency in underwater environments. This is in a previous section. At a meeting of world-renowned biologists in London, J.B.S. Haldane began to expatiate about the possibility of creating new, far-out forms of man for space exploration. The most obvious abnormalities in extraterrestrial environments, Haldane observed, are differences in gravitation, temperature, air pressure, air composition and radiation. Clearly, a gibbon is better pre-adapted than a man for life in a low gravitational field, such as that of a spaceship, an asteroid, or perhaps even the moon. A platyrrhine with a prehensile tail is even more so. Gene grafting may make it possible to incorporate such features into the human stock. While the scientists at this meeting devoted much of their attention to the moral consequences and perils of the biological revolution, no one challenged Haldane's suggestion that we shall someday make men with tails if we want them. Indeed, Liederberg merely observed that there might well be non-genetic ways to accomplish the same ends more easily. We are going to modify man experimentally through physiological and embryological alterations and by the substitution of machines for his parts, Liederberg declared. If we want a man without legs, we don't have to breed him, we can chop them off. If we want a man with a tail, we will find a way of grafting it onto him. At another meeting of scientists and scholars, Dr. Robert Sinsheimer, a Caltech biophysicist, put the challenge squarely. How will you choose to intervene in the ancient designs of nature for man? Would you like to control the sex of your offspring? It will be as you wish. Would you like your son to be 6 feet tall, 7 feet, 8 feet? What troubles you? Allergy, obesity, arthritic pain? These will be easily handled. For cancer, diabetes, there will be genetic therapy. The appropriate DNA will be provided in the appropriate dose. Viral and microbial disease will be easily met. Even the timeless patterns of growth and maturity and aging will be subject to our design. We know of no intrinsic limits to the lifespan. How long would you like to live? Lest his audience mistake him, Sinsheimer asked, do these projections sound like LSD fantasies, or the view in a distorted mirror? None transcends the potential of what we now know. They may not be developed in the way one might now anticipate, but they are feasible. They can be brought to reality, and sooner rather than later. Not only can such wonders be brought to reality, but the odds are they will. Despite profound ethical questions about whether they should, the fact remains that scientific curiosity is itself one of the most powerful driving forces in our society. In the words of Dr. Rollin D. Hotchkiss of the Rockefeller Institute, many of us feel instinctive revulsion at the hazards of meddling with the finely balanced and far-reaching systems that make us individual. Yet I believe it will be surely be done or attempted. The pathway will be built from a combination of altruism, private profit, and ignorance. To this list, worse yet, he might have added political conflict and bland unconcern. Thus, Dr. A. Neyfakh, Neyfakh, Chief of the Research Laboratory of the Institute of Development Biology of the Soviet Academy of Sciences, predicts with a frightening lack of anxiety that the world will soon witness a genetic equivalent of the arms race. He bases his argument on the notion that the capitalist powers are engaged in a struggle for brains. To make up for the brain drain, one or another of the reactionary governments will be compelled to employ genetic engineering to increase its output of geniuses and gifted individuals. Since this will occur regardless of their intention, an international genetics race is inevitable, and this being so, he implies the Soviet Union ought to be ready to jump the gun. Criticised by the Soviet philosopher A. Petropavlovsky for his seeming willingness, even enthusiasm, to participate in such a race, Neyfakh shrugged aside the horrors that might be unleashed by hasty application of the new biology, replying merely that the advance of science is, and ought to be, unstoppable. If Neyfakh's political logic leaves something to be desired, his appeal to Cold War passions as a justification for genetic tinkering is terrifying. In short, it is safe to say that unless specific countermeasures are taken, if something can be done, someone, somewhere will do it. The nature of what can and will be done exceeds anything that man is as yet psychologically or morally prepared to live with.